Good morning and welcome back to Black Bear Forge. I asked if you had any questions and you did not disappoint. You had lots of questions. This was on a community post a few days ago and I think I got close to 6 dozen responses. I don't know how many of those are going to be the same question worded a different way, but I'm going to try and answer as many of those as I can today. If there are really 6 dozen questions and they need more involved answers, there is no way I'm going to get through all of them. So we're going to have to do another video on this subject sometime in the not too distant future. Right up front, I'm going to apologize if I butcher your name. Sometimes I get the pronunciations wrong. Mert Sager asks, I recently watched a video where someone coated a small workpiece with a sludge of powdered boric acid and denatured alcohol to prevent scale forming after quenching. Do you think this would work with a larger workpiece? Well, I've never heard of this being done with boric acid and alcohol, but I have seen similar techniques being done to protect pieces being forge welded. Let me get an example here. Now this is a sample piece from the Devil's Blacksmith project. I gave them some support, and depending on the level of support, you got some sort of little perk. And this is one of the perks that I got. It is not work I did. But when they were doing this video, this series, these really detailed things, they would coat with some sort of a clay slurry. It may have been the boric acid and alcohol, I don't really know. I don't think they explained it that well. But they had coated it with clay so that they could bring the weld area up to a forge welding heat without scaling all the detail off of the more finely detailed parts. And in their bigger project, there are a lot of way more finely detailed parts than there are in this sample piece. So it's definitely a valid technique. Now, if you're quenching things to harden them and you're covering your cutting edge, that's going to be a problem because it's not going to cool at the proper rate and it's going to completely change your heat treating parameters. So I wouldn't do that. But I think if you're just trying to prevent scale while you're working forge welding because you've got detail you don't want to burn off, I think that's a valid technique. How that goes for quenching, you just really have to kind of try it and experiment with it and see if that changes the hardening and tempering properties if that's what you're working on. Robin Johnson says, I am curious about the value of building and using a side blast forge. After watching a dozen or so build videos on YouTube on the side blast forge, they seem to be complicated with a cooling tank and a tuer that is water cooled for durability and to avoid consuming the tuer in the heat of the reducing fire. I've given it some thought to instead build a side blast forge that uses a refractory and casting the tuer instead, so there's no need for water cooling. And that goes on a little bit more. I don't have a lot of experience with side blast forges. Just for everybody else, let me find a whiteboard here. I don't know if this will be in focus or not. I need a stand for this thing. I guess it's going to have to be a video. So here in the US, the most common forge is a bottom blast forge. That's one where you have a cast iron fire pot and the air is coming up through the bottom of the fire pot to feed the fire. A side blast forge, the air comes in from the side, so you usually have a depression in a bed of sand or something, and the tuer, or the part where the air is coming in, is right there next to the fire. It's not coming up from the bottom where it kind of stays cool, relatively speaking. And these tuers get hot, they get clinker that plugs them up, they scale. The best ones are made from cast iron, and they are a double. They have a central pipe where the air comes in, and they have an outer casing around them that's water cooled. These don't need any kind of a pump. The water tank on the back of the forge just uses convection currents. As the water in the tuer heats up, it rises and goes up and is replaced by cold water just naturally. And that's a pretty old system. It's been around for a long time. And I think it's pretty common in the UK. I think their side blast forges are much more common. I don't know why it wouldn't work other than if clinker gets in front of it, will it stick and plug it up? That was a little bit less of a risk with the water-cooled cast iron. It's worth trying. Certainly if you have the ability to make this and it's not going to put you out a whole lot time or money-wise, it's worth trying, and then let us know if it works. I think it's an interesting idea. Might even catch on. Ryan Barnes would like to see a video of bigger diameter rings or basket circles and how you would make them easier. I don't have a bending fork or hardy tool yet, so making them without these would be interesting to know. Well, I think that's one that might be worth making an entire video on, so maybe we'll look in the near future on showing some of the things I have available for making rings of various sizes. But real quick, you can do these freehand over the horn of the anvil. It's hard to get them really accurate. It would be a real skill builder, but you can get some pretty accurate rings done that way. You can bend rings around various pipe sizes, so if you have a piece of pipe that's the right diameter for the interior of your ring, you can get it hot, bend it around that. In my shop, I would use either the fly press, or I actually have a ring roller, or if you find an old tire bend or something like that. But in a small shop, my recommendation would be to make an assortment of bending forks. This one is cut out, goes in the vise, so you don't have to have a hardy shank on it. This is just a piece of bent round bar. I've got these, probably 24 of them, different sizes bar, different sizes of opening. They come in really handy for all sorts of stuff. And they just go in your vise, so it's really easy to work with them. Most of these you will need a top bending fork. These are made out of road grader blade. They're really a tough bending fork, but you can forge these out of mild steel. I'll link to a video up here where I show forging a basic bending fork. But you can also fabricate them. You can just weld round pins onto a piece of square bar and make them out of mild steel. They're going to work just fine. So it's well worth taking the time to make a bending fork. Whether you cut it out of road grader blade, forge it in one piece, fabricate it, some combination thereof, I do think it's worth taking the time to make these tools. But having said that, I think we will look at a dedicated video just on all the different ways you can bend round rings. The tool bucket says, I have a propane forge and it is constantly running out of gas. Problem is I have low budget, so I want to start selling some of my blacksmithing projects to help me pay for propane. That's understandable, but I don't know where to start selling them. I've just started a YouTube channel and it's still small, and I was wondering how I could sell them online. My other option is selling them in person at flea markets, but I usually don't have time to be there. Is there any other way to sell them? I actually did a series last year, starting with a small shop setup, about a $500 investment in forge, anvil, buying your first tank of propane, materials, tongs, hammer, all of that stuff, so you could work on this exact plan, made some stuff, and then talked about where to sell them. And I will link to the video on where to sell the stuff and pricing, that kind of stuff, up here. But to kind of recap what I said in that video, certainly flea markets, craft fairs, art festivals, county fairs, things like that, aren't a bad place, but as he mentions, it takes time to be there, and we don't always have the time to go sit there, and you don't always get any return on your time. You might sell stuff, but you have to sit there all day, and if you sold $100 worth of product, your overhead in making that product was maybe $30, maybe it cost you $30 for the booth space, another $20 in lunch, travel expenses, things like that. $80 that it's cost you to make $20, and you've spent a 6 or 8 hour day sitting behind a table for $20, not to mention the time it took you to actually make them. So those things aren't always the best option. Now, I've had my own website, and it's kind of nice to have your own website. You get to design it the way you want, manage it the way you want, but it can also be kind of a hassle if you're not real into maintaining a website. These days, I do most of my online sales through Etsy. And Etsy, I kind of got a love-hate relationship with Etsy. It is convenient. They take care of inventory. They'll calculate shipping. You can use it to print shipping labels, and at a discounted rate for the shipping labels. It costs you less than if you take it to the post office. But their fees can be kind of high. Now, I was just doing some bookkeeping this morning and doing last month's Etsy sales. Didn't sell a lot on Etsy last month. It was about $1,600 worth of product I sold on Etsy. Spent about $160 in Etsy fees. Those are the fees they charge you for the privilege of selling things on Etsy. And another $175 in shipping. Now the shipping is built into the product price, so that's all kind of calculated, and it just depends on how you set that up. But that's 20% or more of what I sold that is going to the fees for Etsy. But that's still less than it would cost at a craft show. The main reason I like Etsy is sales tax. If you have your own website, you've got to worry about where you need to collect sales tax, and that gets more complicated all the time. You used to just have to collect sales tax if you sold something where you were living. So if you sold something in your state, you would collect state sales tax, and if it was in your city, you'd have to pay city sales tax. Now a lot of states require sales tax for any sale made in their state, whether you live there or not. And that gets really complicated. There are a lot of rules. I don't really understand them, and I don't want to understand them. Sales tax forms have always been a hassle. When you're selling on Etsy, your customers are actually dealing with Etsy. They aren't dealing with you personally, but Etsy then calculates and collects the sales tax based on wherever that customer is and wherever the sale's being made, and they remit the sales tax to the proper authority. I don't have to worry about it. If you have your own website, you need to be on top of that stuff. So that's a long-winded answer. You might not need to go look at that video now, but that video's there, might have a little bit more information. eBay is certainly another option. If you have an active Instagram account, you can occasionally post things on your Instagram that are for sale, but you need to build the account based on people wanting to see what you're up to. If you start a brand new account and the first post is, buy my stuff, you're probably never going to get any followers on Instagram. You got to build the account. They got to be interested in you. They got to start saying, hey, I'd love to have one of those. How can I buy one? And then maybe you can start saying, hey, this thing's for sale every now and then. As soon as it becomes nothing but a sales pitch, people tend to lose interest. GameFace says, are you willing to take on an apprentice? This actually comes up quite a bit. People send me emails, letters, direct messages on Facebook, Instagram, whatever. I would love to come help you out. I will be your apprentice for free, make your life easier. I guarantee you that as soon as somebody shows up to be an apprentice, that is where my focus is going to lie. It's not going to make my life any easier. It's going to make my life harder because now I'm responsible for teaching them whatever they're here to learn. It's not a traditional apprenticeship where they're the ones shoveling coal, sweeping the floors, cleaning out the fire from the previous day, stocking material on the rack. People that want an apprenticeship today want to come learn. They want an education, and they want that education in exchange for some work. It's a fair enough idea, but at that point I become a supervisor or I become an employer, and that's not what I want to do. I want to be a blacksmith, and I want to make YouTube videos. So I really do not want an apprentice. I don't want to hire any employees. I don't want to hire an editor or videographer for the videos. None of that stuff. I just like being my own thing, and that's the way I'm going to keep it. Anth-Ax, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that one, asks, do you have any craftsmen, painters, artists, artisans in your family, both living and dead? I just found out I have a farrier and a wheelmaker in my family tree from the 1500s. I had a great-great-grandfather that was a blacksmith apparently in Texas. Don't really know anything about him. I just know that he did have a blacksmith shop. And it seems like just about everybody you talk to online has a grandfather or great-grandfather or an uncle that was a blacksmith. Beyond that, my father's father, my grandfather, was a commercial artist. He did ads for magazines, posters, things like that, when all of that had to be hand-drawn. We have some of his paintings that he had done in the house, but that wasn't really how he made his living. He's more likely to make his living doing political posters or magazine ads, things like that, newspaper ads, that all had to be hand done. Matter of fact, I have his old drawing board. The board that he did most of his work on is down in my office. I don't do any drawing on it, but it's down there, and it's something that my father used until he passed away, and now I've inherited it. So the third generation to have that drawing board. So it's a nice remembrance. Now, my dad was actually a petroleum geologist, but he was also an avid photographer. He learned photography in the Army. He was assigned to Army intelligence and did whatever photography stuff. You know, and that was back in the days when cameras were great big, everything was manual, and you had to develop all your own film. and he progressed with the evolution of cameras and was always an avid amateur photographer, did sell some of his work, did some wedding photography, things like that, but mostly he did it for fun. Remember the old saying that a photo never lies? Well, I knew that had become BS the day that I found out that he was taking digital family images that had my ex-wife in them, and he was editing them out with Photoshop so she was no longer in the family photos. So now you have to take photos and videos with a little bit of a grain of salt because they aren't always as accurate as they might seem to be. Then my mother, probably later in life, probably in her 40s, maybe even 50s, took up quilting, and she was a very avid quilter, very accomplished quilter. She's taught classes, has work featured in big national shows. Some of her work has been featured in books. She doesn't do much of it anymore because her eyesight is failing, but we have some fantastic quilts that my mother has made, and she was really quite accomplished. So yes, there is some creative background in my family, and I married into it. Janet's done a little bit of blacksmithing. She's done a little bit of woodworking, some green woodworking, spoon carving, bowl carving, but mostly she is a weaver. She likes making rugs and blankets in the southwestern style that would be common in New Mexico. So I do hope that answers your question. I think that's where I'm going to leave this question and answer video. I don't want these to get too long-winded, or people aren't going to take the time to listen to all the answers anyways. And I think that's only about 10% of the questions that have been asked so far. So there could be 8, 9, 10 more videos in this series just to answer this one set of questions. Some of them, like the ring bending, are going to prompt an entirely new video just to cover that topic. And while I had intended to do these Q&A style videos maybe one a month on a Sunday as one of the Sunday videos so that I could free up some more time in the shop for doing other things, if I'm going to do that many of them, I think I'm going to just try to do them weekly, but I'll do them on Wednesday mornings so that they don't take the place of the Sunday video. Some of the Sunday videos may still be simple videos. Matter of fact, the ring video may be this Sunday's video. I think that's a good idea. I'll plan to do that. And then we'll just see how long it takes for me to get through all of these. So if you like the question and answer format, come back next Wednesday. We're going to get back into this. For everybody that took the time to ask a question, I really appreciate your involvement. That's what makes the blacksmithing community so good, is everybody works together, shares the answers, shares the techniques. And I think we can learn a lot by paying attention to some of these questions. And if you have an answer that is different than my answer, if you've got some ideas, you want to expand on the idea, by all means, leave a comment down in the comments section so that we can all learn from your personal experience as well. I want to thank my channel members and Patreon patrons for providing financial support for these videos, and remind you that the channel members and the Patreon patrons receive early access, so you get the videos a day or two early, and the Patreon videos get the video without any of the annoying ads. So if you're interested in any of that, check out the channel memberships or the Patreon page. There are links below the video for both of those things. In the meantime, I hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop. Stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next video.